I'm going to try and answer a question today from one of my followers over on Patreon. It's about painting a misty forest scene. So I'm going to use this acrylic ink and these cheap synthetic brushes. I'm also going to use this mist bottle quite a bit, and also I'll use some paper towel for blotting out to create the misty effect. I'm going to use this block of 140 pounds cold pressed paper that's made by Meaden. Now, pine trees or pine forests, not really a scene I see a lot where I live in the south of England, but I'll give it a go and try and create something in my style, and we'll just see how we get on anyway. It's been quite a fun exercise to give it a go. So I'm just going to start by wetting the paper all over. Quite generous with the water. I want the ink to move about quite a bit. I'm just going to use the small pointy synthetic brush. Not sure what size it is, probably a 1 or a 2. And I'm just going to drop the ink into the water there that's just kind of sitting proud on the page. And you can see it kind of instantly starts spreading out. You see it kind of creates its own misty effect really without having to do much at all. Kind of just randomly dropping the ink there into the water. And I'll grab some paper towel and just knock it right back. Really just blotting it all out and just leaving behind the misty areas. And I'll just give that another spray with the bottle. And just soften it even more with a paper towel. Now I'm going to keep going like this, just adding bits of ink, spraying, and then lifting out until I find the effect that I'm after. I'm not really using a reference photo for this as such. I did have a look on Pixabay and Wiki Commons, and there's quite a few photos over there of pine forests with mist, so kind of put them into memory really, I suppose, and I'm just working from that. And so I'm just trying to find maybe the shape of a tree line, but I don't want anything defined at all. I just want it all to recede off into the distance. So I'll just keep spraying and then blotting away with the towel, and then just adding a bit more ink. And then just keep lifting as I go. Use the same piece of paper towel the whole time, and then the paper towel actually picks up small amounts of ink, and that kind of adds to the effect. I find these misty scenes can be a sort of touch cliche, I suppose, in a way, but it's still quite nice to have a go and try and find something interesting. I always think kind of water-based medium, like watercolour and acrylic ink and so on, really do lend themselves to kind of misty scenes. Just something about the way it interacts with the water. Kind of gives you a misty effect without having to do too much, really, I suppose. And so as the paper starts to slowly dry off, I can add slightly darker areas, still touching it with a mist bottle just to soften it off, but getting ever so slightly more defined as we come closer. And now just picking out the tops of a tree line that's a bit closer, so I can leave just a few slightly harder edges on those, and now maybe start to define the shape of a top of a tree. And another tree there. I mean, you can just sort of bring up a line in the middle that can sort of act as a trunk, or placing it basically where you want the tree to be, and then just bring the brush down on the side, left and right, just to sort of create the foliage of the tree. So again, just bring up a few lines, few straight lines up, and then very kind of like loose left to right marks, just to create the top of a pine tree. And again, just knock it back with a paper towel. Now getting ever so slightly larger and more defined as we come sort of towards the middle ground of the painting. Don't know why something about painting pine trees always reminds me of Bob Ross. I think it's somewhere in the back of my mind I'm thinking of the same technique, really, I suppose. Bring up the trunk and then very loosely put the foliage on. Okay, now some even thicker paint, or ink I should say. And you can see by having different areas of slightly darker paint and then lighter, more hazy paint off in the distance, Gives kind of like an instant sense of distance and perspective. Okay, it's dried out a little bit there on the right hand side, so I'll just give that another spray with the mist bottle. And the paper towel's actually picked up quite a lot of ink now, so as I'm blotting it, I'm dragging it down below and just kind of almost using it like a sponge, and it adds even more kind of misty effects. I'll just put a few ever so slightly defined areas off there in the distance, and then just knock them back again with the paper towel. It kind of gives the impression that there's hundreds or thousands even of trees. Okay, getting even closer still, so making the marks a bit bigger, a bit thicker. So getting quite a lot more ink on the brush. And so as we come in towards the foreground, getting quite thick, quite bold. And now just kind of joining all the shapes together. Still painting individual trees, but just join all the shapes together. And almost blocking it in at the bottom of the sheet there. And just knock that back a tiny bit there with the paper towel. The paper's actually drying out quite quickly. It's quite a warm day here today. And so almost blocking it out now, right down in the foreground. Just leave a few areas of light shining through. And then hopefully when it dries, the ink should run down a bit and leave a suggestion of light shining through. Actually got the board at about 45 degrees, so it's a bit steeper than I usually paint, but I do want the ink to flow down. And hopefully make for quite a bold, moody painting at the end of it. And I'll add a watercolour wash in a little while. I think probably keep it very simple, quite muted, but just to add a bit of atmosphere. And a tiny little bit more definition just in the distant hill. Maybe it's a few treetops just sticking out above the mist. Hardly using any ink at all at the moment, just really just used what was on the paper towel, my blotting towel there, that's sitting in the palette. I think they're a little bit too dark actually, so I'll just knock them back. And same again. I've just grabbed some clean water on the brush just to soften the edges of those. And a bit more water just on the brush. You can actually drag that around and create some nice little effects. Again, put some ink in and then just soften it off with some clean water. And I'm just filling in just some areas in the foreground that look a bit messy. But I like the way the water is actually running down into that foreground area and creating a misty effect of light coming through. Okay, with that, that's the first wash, so I'll dry that fully. Okay, I like the way that's dried. The water has actually run down, created some nice effects there in the foreground. And I could leave it as it is, but I think I'll add some colour, like I said I was going to, so I think I will. And I'll just add some cobalt blue just to the grey that's in the palette there. And very lightly, just a really simple sky. And I think by the time that sky dries, you'll barely be able to see it really, but just help to add a sense of atmosphere. Just pick up a bit of Hansa yellow, some Indian yellow, and just pick out a few areas in that distant hill, and using pretty much the same technique as I used with the ink. So I'll put the paint on and then grab another piece of paper towel. It's a clean piece of paper towel, and then just soften that off. And again, much like with the ink wash, same technique, just building up layers, but taking care to leave the misty areas behind. See, that went on a little bit too boldly there, so just knock it back. Just grab some Viridian and some raw sienna. And same again, just kind of suggesting a few tree shapes. It's not even really tree shapes, it's just little lines, I suppose, but it gives the impression of trees. And that there's a tiny bit of colour coming through the mist. Okay, some more Viridian, some ultramarine, some more raw sienna. So ever so slightly darker colour coming into the sort of mid-ground area. Strengthen that green colour slightly with a touch more raw sienna. And almost randomly putting it in, I suppose, not thinking of tree shapes, but then just knocking it back again with the paper towel. Okay, it's even more ultramarine and raw sienna. And I'm just going to drag that across the foreground area. Now I'm painting that over the top of the ink, so I'm not 100% sure that's going to dry. But it's quite experimental, so fingers crossed. So it's even more raw sienna, touch more hands of yellow. And just kind of almost always using vertical strokes and then just softening it off with the paper towel. There's a touch of cobalt blue into the mix there, and just drag that straight over the top of the ink. And hopefully create an effect of some light and mist coming through. Actually liking how it's looking now, so I won't do too much more. Just cover over some of the little white areas in the foreground there. It's actually looking quite moody, so I like that. I think I've just had a touch of light red as well, because it's all kind of very muted, so tiny little flash of colour here and there. Just a touch of interest, and because we've got some green hues going on, it's nice to complement it with some reds. And again, just soften everything as I go. And because the ink went down first, so all the hard edges are there already, so you can get away with everything being soft. So I'll leave it at that. Anyway, so that's the finished painting. And I quite like the way the paint has dried over the top of the ink down there in the foreground. It's created some interesting effects. Well, I hope you like that. That's a misty pine forest scene, painted with acrylic ink and watercolour. And like I said at the start, that was a question from one of my followers on Patreon. And if you join me over there, you can ask me anything. Ask me to paint a particular scene, or anything that you've got trouble with, or you want to ask me any questions, then join me over there and get involved. It's a nice little community. I'll be back again next week with another video. So please give this one a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And until then, happy painting. Bye for now.